Why they have to do Fukushima is because if they take out the research reactor, which they're going to, by massive bombing, then of course Fukushima can be used to make Cobalt-60. And as we explained in the last show, Cobalt-60 is the end of the Rothschilds because the Rothschilds cannot conquer the world with Cobalt-60. Let's go on to why they can't conquer the world with Cobalt-60. Well, the US military, which is the thugs, the Rense thugs of the Rothschild Bolsheviks, they cannot fight and conquer the world with Cobalt-60. How? Well, they've got a supercomputer or supercomputers that can map the future. Every single person on the planet, every single factor has been stuck into them. They use, we are told, quantum computing or light chips. It was on the front page of the FT that light chips, which have taken over from electron chips for computers, are now doable. That was on the front page of the FT this week.
And whatever they say, we got to go to a break, but whatever they say is doable means it's already been done.
Exactly.
The idea of supercomputers having literally been used to clone the entire living, breathing, dying planet Earth is quite accurate, and the Pentagon or some military agency disclosed that some years ago. Nobody took notice of it, but yours truly and a few of you listening, it's quite true. They can literally not only predict what the reaction will be to any kind of a gambit they wish to release on the planet, but I suspect that their manipulation of the public and geopolitics in general is made infinitely more easy with that exact kind of computer, Earth, to play with. Be right back in just a couple. We're back with Tim, and by the way, his point about President Ahmadinejad's remarks about the Holocaust are quite accurate. He is a criminal now, and indicted, of course, in Germany and other countries on the Bolshevik state of Europe. I like that. That's very accurate. That's exactly where it's going, and exactly what the Germans, when they realized the war was lost, were predicting would happen. The issue of World War II and the Holocaust is dying for forensic, scientific, academic, unimpeded, honest investigation. It'll never happen, but calling for that makes people a criminal. I've been calling for it for many years. I say, let's clean it up, let's clear it up, and end all the crap. Let's find out what really happened. All right? But since it's an industry and a sacred religion, we're not allowed to do that. All right, Tim, go right ahead.
Anyway, the U.S. military are finished if the attack on Iran doesn't go ahead in November, because once Cobalt-60 is produced in large quantities, that's the end of the U.S. military. Let's explain why. There was a British businessman arrested for trying to sell cobalt aluminate to the Iranians. Why were the Zionist British so terrified of cobalt aluminate? Well, you put cobalt aluminate into a research reactor or into Fukushima, or you put it around enriched uranium to turn into Cobalt-60 aluminate. You then put the Cobalt-60 aluminate into aluminium in an argon smelter. That then dopes the aluminium with Cobalt-60 aluminate. You then grind the Cobalt-60 aluminate doped aluminium into a fine dust. You then mix the dust with sodium chlorate.
Now, Tim, excuse me a minute. I don't want to give people the recipe for catastrophe here, so what I'm suggesting here is Are you putting out information that is readily available on the internet? If so, that's fine. Otherwise, I don't want to be involved.
The question was on, as I say, in the internet, and he got arrested for it. And that's why. Because what happens is the aluminium powder. When I was a kid, we used to detonate aluminium and sodium chlorate.
Did you?
Which produces a very fierce incendiary. But what's important is the cobalt aluminate, which is doped into the aluminium, produces nanoparticles of Cobalt-60. So you get a potentially lethal gas of Cobalt-60. So now, if you put some of that into mortar rounds and you fire them at U.S. bases in Afghanistan, the American troops there have to leave Afghanistan overnight because all their camps are death traps.
Right.
You can't wear an NBC suit forever. And of course, the Cobalt-60 nanoparticles turn the NBC suits, which the American occupiers wear, into a radioactive radiotherapy device, which irradiates their skin with gamma rays.
Unfortunately, the Cobalt-60 would also not be particularly beneficial to the Afghan citizens.
No, because the mortar round only contains, for example, 1 to 10 grams. 1 gram kills 1,000 Americans within a couple of weeks. 10 grams kills 10,000. So you can actually localize it. So 50 Cobalt-60 mortar rounds containing between 1 to 10 grams of this Cobalt-60 in the form of Cobalt-60 aluminate in the aluminium dust would wipe out the Americans in Afghanistan. So the Taliban just need to be given 50 Cobalt-60 mortar rounds to destroy NATO and the US in Afghanistan. That's why it's so dangerous. If you give mortar rounds to the Sunnis or Al-Qaeda in Iraq, and they fire them at the 50,000 American troops in Iraq in their bases, the Americans will have to leave Iraq overnight. That's why it's so dangerous. If you give it, for example, to the real IRA, because the Catholics young Catholics especially, in Northern Ireland want the occupiers, the British, to get out of their country. If you give small amounts of this stuff to the real IRA, who then fire these mortar rounds at the Protestant areas in Northern Ireland, they can actually ethnically cleanse Northern Ireland. That's what's so good about it. It just poisons a small area, and the residual effect. Okay, it might give people cancer over the long term, but it's relatively if you get cancer after 20 years in larger numbers, well, so be it. But you can localize the effect. So it actually revolutionizes warfare, because the US and NATO move into occupied territory. They have to have big bases. They have to have big supply camps. You fire these Cobalt-60 small amounts mortar rounds at supply camps, which renders all the billions of dollars worth of supplies useless. So the supply chain collapses. We know that they have to live in camps because they can't live among the population, because their occupiers tortured, murdering the Afghans and Iraqis. So they have to live in these protected camps. So you can actually wipe out all their camps with minimal effort. And we also know that when they invade a country, they set up, for example, in Kabul, a perimeter in which their puppets live. So a Cobalt-60 mortar round into the Kabul center of Mr. Kazi and his banksters who've looted the country will wipe out the government of Afghanistan. If you fired one into the green zone of Iraq, you wipe out the Iraqi puppet government. So are you beginning to understand why Cobalt-60 is inimical to the U.S. Military conquest of the planet?
Well, it's a fascinating tactical scenario you present, and would obviously
now, for example,
work.
We know that when Iran's attacked, they'll want to attack North Korea, because North Korea is producing Cobalt-60. So the North Koreans can win easily by firing a Cobalt-60 missile of low yield, not too much of the stuff, into Seoul. and another one into the port city, which I always forget, down the south of the country. That will then render South Korea a basket case without a great deal of warfare. We also know that the Americans will wish to conquer Venezuela when they attack Iran. So if Chavez, who will have to run from the might of the U.S. military as they land in Venezuela and set up big camps, he'll have to run into the jungle. But the use of the Cobalt-60 mortar round, low-yield Cobalt-60 mortar round, renders the invasion of Venezuela impossible, because you just fire into the American camps and the supply dumps, rendering the entire military personnel irradiated with a lethal dose. All their supplies are lethal dose, but the coverage outside of the bases is minimal.
As
long
okay.
as you don't use too much of the stuff, it is the perfect weapon to use against the US and NATO, which come in, they use overwhelming air superiority, and they're
all right, hold on, Tim. We'll be right back with more after this.